Welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm Roger Humphrey. In this episode, I'm pleased to welcome true crime author Rod Sadler back to the show. Please join us as we revisit his book, Grim Paradise, about an unsolved murder on Michigan's Mackinac Island. And then we talk about his newest book, Depraved Obsession, the gripping true story of law enforcement's hunt for a sadistic serial killer. As a retired police officer, Rod has a unique insight that makes him a compelling storyteller. Before we begin, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and follow. And if you have a moment, leave a comment. Me and my channel would appreciate it a lot. Thanks. And we are welcoming to the show the wonderful writer, Rod Sadler. Hey, Rod, welcome back.
Oh, I don't know as I'd go wonderful, but but thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, well, I got a few things to talk about here. Um, Number one, you've been on the road some. You've been doing uh, a lot of personal appearances lately.
I have. I was really lucky to be invited down to Birmingham, down near Detroit, and do a little presentation. And the librarian there said, "Hey, I can put your name on a list server for our library," and he said maybe it'll get you one or two speaking engagements. And my email blew up, and
Wow.
so yeah, I was really lucky. So it's been a busy spring. It's still going probably until the end of May.
So you're out there right now at the moment promoting Grim Paradise, which is the book that we talked about the last time you're here. Why don't you take a moment and kind of give us a review of that book, an idea of what that's like.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll tell you a couple recent developments in that book.
Okay.
It's the story of a dearborn widow by the name of Frances Lacey, and Frances was encouraged to go up to Mackinac Island with her son and or her daughter and son-in-law back in July of 1960, and she was going to walk out to British Landing. His Her son-in-law's mother had rented a cabin out there, and they wanted her to stay out there, but she insisted on staying at a hotel downtown. She said she'd just walk out the next morning, and so on Sunday morning, she never showed up. And the state police were notified. They began to search the island, and her body was found 4 days later. She'd been strangled and raped and strangled with her own panties, basically. And the case to this day remains cold. There's absolutely been no one arrested in this case, and there are no, at least at that time, there were no legitimate suspects.
Ugh, terrible.
It is. It's a horrible crime, and it have occurred in one of Michigan's premier vacation spots makes it all that worse.
And having lived there, I can tell you that that kind of a stain on the community is absolutely dreadful. So I just
Yeah.
because the people there are good people,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
and hospitality is really they're not that's their gig. That's what they do, and so
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that just is just dreadful. How's the book doing? Is it selling well?
I honestly, I do not keep track of sales, and maybe I should, but I'm not an author that does it to make money. I do know that when I spoke down in Livonia here about 3 weeks ago, I had over 100 people show up
Wow.
to hear about it because a lot of people have never heard of a murder on Mackinac Island, and the fact that it's still unsolved is intriguing. It's intriguing. And since the book has come out, uh, I've had a couple things develop, and maybe some new leads in the case, believe it or not, 65 years after Mrs. Lacey was
Wow, that's
murdered.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. I had um, Mrs. Lacey's nephew reached out to me first, and he said that his dad had been, well, he and his family had gone up there 2 weeks after the murder, and his dad actually shot a video of the crime scene just 2 weeks afterward, or not a video, but an 8 millimeter movie. So he had that digitized for me.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. It doesn't really offer anything of any evidentiary value, but it does give you an idea, of what things look like up there.
Yeah.
And it's not real long. It's like a minute long is all, but it was interesting to do that. And so after that, I had a couple retired lab people from the Michigan State Police reach out to me and tell me how things were done back, at least in the 70s, when trace evidence was received at the crime lab. So that kind of gave me an idea that there's a possibility, at least in my mind, that maybe some of the evidence still exists in that case. And then the most recent development came out of the blue. I had a gentleman reach out to me by email and indicate that he felt a certain person was involved, and that there was a family letter indicating something about the murder on Mackinac Island. And he was able to track down that letter and send it to me. And so that's another new lead in the case that I'm working on. So lots of things going on behind the scenes.
So was that letter at all helpful?
Actually, I don't know at this point. I think that it will be. There's a technique that the Michigan State Police, well, all law enforcement uses if they've been trained in it. It's called the SCAN technique. SCAN meaning scientific content analysis. And the state police has a team of investigators that deal solely with scan analysis of a person's writing when they are referring to a specific crime. And honestly, in 30 years of police work, I was never trained in it. But they're supposed to be able to determine whether or not a person is being truthful when they're talking about a specific crime. And this particular letter is devoted all to the murder of Mrs. Lacey on Mackinac Island. So the state police has agreed to hopefully take a look at the letter for me. And if they come back with the opinion that the writer was being deceitful in his letter, uh, it really is not going to be anything concrete to say that he is or is not the killer, but it'll be evident, I'm sorry, circumstantial evidence, maybe pointing to him as the killer. So, like I said, there's a lot going on and a lot of moving pieces right now. We'll see where it all goes.
And we should remind people that you are a retired police officer with with
Yes,
with a minute or two in the business.
one or two, yeah. Yeah.
And you worked as a detective too, right?
Very briefly, most of my career was spent as a deputy sheriff and then as a sergeant. I was promoted in 1999. And then I had two other specialties, actually three. I was our police composite artist
Okay.
for the Eaton County Sheriff's Office, and I was our lead traffic crash investigator. And I was also deputy emergency manager. So I kind of wore a bunch of different hats, if you
Yeah.
will.
That happens a lot in the smaller counties, right? Smaller
Yeah,
departments.
it does. Yeah.
Well, guess what? It's Tuesday. You get to do
Yeah.
you get to do this too,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Larry called in sick. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and believe me, that happened before too.
I'm
So
sure. I'm absolutely sure. So that's funny. So you have a new book out called Depraved Obsession. Is that right?
I do. I do. It'll launch on May 6th, be published by Wild Blue Press out of Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
They published both my previous books, Killing Women and Grim Paradise. And I'm really excited about it. I had a lot of really good input from people that were involved in the case and was able to access some police reports and lots and lots of media coverage at the time that these cases occurred. So I think I've got a real good combination of resources to put this book together.
So can you give us a thumbnail sketch of what it's about, what we're talking about here?
Oh, of course, of course. It really started in the early 70s with the suspect, a guy by the name of Ronald Bailey. Ronald Bailey was basically obsessed with sex and self-gratification. And at one point, he kidnapped a youth, threatened him with a knife, sexually assaulted the youth. And instead of being thrown into prison at the age of 16 or in a youth facility, the presiding judge gave him probation for 5 years and put him into counseling at what was back then called the Hawthorne Center in Northville. It was a psychiatric hospital or treatment center for youths.
Now, this is
And
Michigan still.
in Michigan,
Yeah.
yes, in Michigan. And so when Ron Bailey got out of that facility, he continued what he had been doing, kidnapping young males and molesting them. And it got to the point, he did leave for Florida at one point from like 1980 to 1983. And that's significant because Ron Bailey continued to do in Florida what he had done here in Michigan. And then there was some speculation that he may have stopped in Ohio briefly on his way back up to Michigan in 1983. But in 1985, Ron Bailey kidnapped a young boy by the name of Sean Moore off his bicycle near Brighton, literally just south of the city of Brighton. Sean's body was found about 2 weeks later up in Gladwin County. He'd been sexually assaulted. They could
Now,
not determine.
Gladwin County, that would have been like 60, 70, 80 miles north of Brighton, at least, maybe more.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was about 100 miles away.
Okay.
And they couldn't determine a cause of death because he'd laid out in the elements for
Oh,
2 weeks. But the Livonia police had had numerous run-ins with Ron Bailey, and so they called the Michigan State Police and said, "Hey, you might want to look at this guy because his MO fits the same things that we had." And so when they interviewed Ron Bailey, they brought him in for a police lineup, and none of the witnesses that had seen Sean getting kidnapped on Labor Day weekend in 1985 could pick Ron Bailey out of the lineup at that point. And so as soon as Ron Bailey was released, he fled the state. But what he didn't know is the Michigan State Police had established a surveillance on him and literally followed him to Florida.
oh,
Uh, and then when Sean Moore's body was found, they authorized a warrant for kidnapping and for murder. And so they said, go ahead and pick him up in Florida. Well, he fled the trailer that he was living in. And so they had a 3-day manhunt for him in Florida, one of the largest manhunts in Florida history. And finally, Ron Bailey gave up. He'd been running for 3 days in a swamp with, I don't know what kind of wildlife there is in Florida, but I'm assuming very large mosquitoes, um, who knows what.
and things that'll
So
kill
he,
you.
absolutely, absolutely. So finally, Ron Bailey gave up and they flew him back to Michigan here. And they've discovered that about a year before Sean Moore was kidnapped off his bike, there was another boy who was kidnapped off his bike in Ferndale, Michigan, a young boy by the name of Kenny Myers. And they were able to prove that Ron Bailey was involved in that. And they tied him to an additional kidnapping 1 month before that, where he kidnapped another boy and sexually molested him. And so Ron Bailey went on trial for 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and three counts of kidnapping. And at his trial, he claimed insanity. He claimed that while he was a patient at the Northville Regional Psychiatric Hospital, he was molested by his doctor. His doctor led him into a homosexual relationship, and that's what caused him to be insane at the time that he kidnapped Sean Moore and Kenny Myers. And the jury didn't buy it. They didn't buy it for one instance. It's a really intriguing theory. but they could never get the doctor to testify. They had issued him a subpoena, but they couldn't get it served because he was avoiding it. And so he never came in to testify in Ron Bailey's defense because he knew he'd have to give up the whole relationship thing that he'd established with Ron Bailey. The
Which,
prosecution's stance was the relationship with Dr. Tombo, his psychiatrist, was a consensual relationship. And there's no question about that. There really isn't. So Ron Bailey was convicted. And the interesting thing is that that brief stop in Florida that I mentioned, um, it was near Sylvania, Ohio, and they contacted authorities up here and said, we have a very similar situation. We have a youth here that was murdered. Um, there was evidence of some strangulation, a ligature placed around his neck, and he had alcohol in his system. Well, those were three of Ron Bailey's methods of operation. All three of them he used repeatedly. And on the stand, in fact, Ron Bailey testified in his own defense, and he admitted to kidnapping upwards of 15 boys between the time he was 13 years old and the time that he was caught in 1985. So
wow.
uh, it's an intriguing story. It really is.
It, it's frightening,
It's a,
but
it's a sad story. It wasn't an easy story to write because nobody wants to hear about child killers.
sure.
But I think that it's a book that had to be written. Number one, because I think there are more victims still out there. I think there are. And there is some speculation from at least some authorities that there's a possibility, let me preempt what I'm going to say by telling you that this book is not about the Oakland County child murders in the mid 70s. If you're familiar with those, there was four children who were kidnapped over a period of a year and a half. They were held for short periods of time before their bodies were eventually discovered. And this book is not about those murders, but I can tell you that there's speculation from at least some authorities that there's a possibility that Ron Bailey could have been involved in some way in
Gotcha.
those murders.
So I find it, um, I want to use the word amusing, but this is absolutely not an amusing topic, that people don't realize that a lot of police agencies actually talk to each other. So
Exactly.
they think they can pull something in Michigan and go off and do it again in Colorado, and nobody will ever know. And they don't.
Right.
So if nothing else, maybe you get the news out to the bad guys. Stop it. We do talk to
Yeah.
each other.
You never know. You never know.
So the
We'll
guys
keep
got to
our
knock
fingers
that.
crossed.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. So how did you learn about this case to write about?
You know, back in 1985, when Sean Moore was kidnapped, I used to work briefly in Detroit, and I can remember at the time that all happened. I was driving back and forth to Detroit, and he was kidnapped in the jurisdiction of the Green Oak Township Police in Livingston County, Green Oak Township. And I would drive down US 23 and I could see the Green Oak Township Police Department and realize, oh my gosh, this is where that young boy was kidnapped
Oh,
from.
uh-huh.
And I knew one of the Green Oak Township officers, and we were chatting one day, maybe a year and a half ago, and we were talking about our careers, and he said, "Yeah, I was the first officer involved in the Sean Moore case." He said, "I got flagged down by somebody that witnessed it." And then another friend of mine who worked for the Livingston County Sheriff's Office was actually the first officer on the scene um, after the previous friend had been flagged down. So I had two really good sources there, and he said, you should memorialize this case because it was a case where back in 1985 in the mid 80s, for law enforcement to come together and work side by side, hand in hand, arm in arm, to and share information to solve a case was almost unheard of.
Really?
Because, oh yeah, law enforcement was very territorial, and each particular agency wanted to get credit for the case. In this particular case, you had local, state, and federal agencies come together and form a task force. And the commander of the task force got up on day one and said, I don't care who you are. I don't care how long you've been in law enforcement, but if you have an idea on how we can go about solving this case, I want to hear it. And everybody came together. So beyond the tragedy of the murders, this really is a story of how law enforcement came together to catch a serial killer. And it's really a story of how both Kenny Myers' family and Sean Moore's family uh, changed their tragedy into triumph. And by that I mean formed organizations to help educate kids, and donated the monies that were given to them to help educate kids. And so people, when I submitted this manuscript to my publisher, he said, people are really turned off by child killers. And he said, your book needs to be about uh, the success that law enforcement had in catching this killer and how well the families did. And I said, that's exactly what it is. I didn't have to change anything. And so that made me feel pretty good about it.
Finding that right angle sometimes is really important.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I know that there are times when I have uh, somebody new to interview for the show, and I have to find just that right thing to try to make
Oh,
it
sure. Yeah.
even remotely interesting, even to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I have friends who are retired law enforcement officers, and I always had the sense that this you see in the movies and television the different law enforcement agencies, federal and state and local, an almost disdain for one another. And I always thought that was kind of a Hollywood myth, and it was kind of what it was suggested to me from my friends. Yeah, we hang out with the FBI from time to time, and and so on and so forth. And so I'm surprised. I guess I didn't realize that that was actually based in truth. That law enforcement was that territorial at the time.
Yeah, it really was. And even beyond agency to agency within a certain agency. And I'll give you an example. If you're familiar at all or remember the John Norman Collins case,
No.
he was a serial killer in the Ypsilanti area in the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
The book, The Michigan Murders, is documentation of that particular case. John Norman Collins is still alive in prison. And when I spoke with one of the investigators in the book that I just finished, he said that he can remember as a young trooper being assigned to the Ypsilanti post, and it was during the John Norman Collins investigation. And he said the Detective Bureau would hold all their information close at hand, and they wouldn't share it with the road patrol. And he was absolutely certain that if they would have shared that information, they could have helped capture John Norman's Collins long before there were other victims out there.
Oh,
And so it's not necessarily, and I'm not disparaging the Michigan State Police because I have the utmost respect for them. I'm just saying that back then, in the late 60s, it seemed at least to one trooper that the detectives were holding all the information close and they weren't sharing it with the road troopers.
so that was a prevailing culture at the time.
Absolutely. It was.
Oh,
It
so
was. And
I
and I think to a certain degree, just based on my experience, I've been out of law enforcement now for over 13 years. I think that it's still prevalent to some degree, depending upon the circumstances of any particular case.
huh. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's kind of, it's probably not news to anybody else because because they watch it in the media all the time. But for me, it was
Sure.
like, well, my friends say, they hang out with the FBI and they hang out with the state troopers and so on.
Oh,
And
sure,
it just
sure.
never occurred to me that there was really that kind of culture there. So and it's to me, it's kind of sad. I know as a musician, um, uh, when I was a kid, I'd always heard about what kind of a backstabbing business this was.
Oh,
And it wasn't until I got into it that I realized that was all myth. The only backstabbing that was going on was the people in the suits who had the fancy ink pens. Those were the guys you had to watch out for. But
uh-huh.
the other musicians were all for, watching you succeed and wanted you, and yeah, they were, and so that part of it was a myth. I didn't realize that at the time, and happily so. I've spent a career in music and and happily I've got friends who are musicians. I've never, ever, ever, ever had an issue where I thought somebody was like trying to hang me out to dry. So
Oh, that's great.
yeah, it really is. It's a life well spent right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, I can't think of any other business where you could say that. I mean, you could work in the banking industry or the insurance industry, even the truck driving industry. There's always that one person that you work with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
And I just haven't had that. I've been very lucky, very fortunate.
You are.
So
Yeah.
and I recognize it. I recognize it. So how long does it take you to research a book like this? And I'm assuming that do you write it while you research it, or do most of your research first and then start to write it?
I'd like to do most of my research first.
Uh-huh.
I have in the past, I've started to write little bits and pieces before I finished my research. I would say my research is literally almost ongoing all the time. Believe it or not, even after the book is published.
Grim
You know,
Paradise,
with
Grim Paradise
Yeah,
being
yeah.
an
Grim
example.
Paradise is a classic example of that. I'm not going to let it go. And in this particular book, this will be launched on May 6th. I have people that are interested in the Sylvania, Ohio case. Hey, are there other victims out there? You still have the unsolved Oakland County child killings. Ron Bailey was living in Florida for 3 years. Are there cases down there? So the research is always there, and it's just whether or not I find time to poke around and look around because I'm already writing two more books. So it's it's kind of time consuming.
Well, that's what we do in our retirement, right? We find something to consume our time.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, we'll be looking forward to the books, and for as soon as they're published, let me know, and I'll get that on the blog so people know and know where to find them,
Oh, great.
and we'll get you out there. So, but in the meantime, Ron, I'm going to thank you for coming back on the show. Believe it or not, we're about out of time, and gosh, it's interesting. I can't wait to get into this book uh, and learn more about this stuff. I really appreciate you writing these books. I think they help us all at one level or another. So
Well,
thanks
I can't.
again.
Thank you for having me, Roger, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Good. See you later.
Okay, take care.
Bye bye.
I want to thank Rod for taking the time to come on the show. If you'd like to know more about him or get his books, there's a link below. Also, if you subscribe to my website, www.rogerhumphrey.com, you can get my weekly blog that will update you on Rod and all of the other guests, all the new things that they're doing and the things that are coming up. I promise, no spam. Thanks for spending time with us, and please tell your friends to check us out here at Creative Conversations with Roger Humphrey.